Hey, this is Kiz from Hip Hop Heals. You're listening to Glow with the Flow podcast, and this is season 3. We've got an amazing guest from Bristol today. Guest, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Euphonique, aka Nikki. I'm a drum and bass DJ and producer. I also run a record label and events company called Subwoofer. Started out as an events company, turned into a record label. Very much about kind of representing the underdog of the industry and bringing new talent through. Alongside DJing and producing kind of internationally, I run mentorships as well under Unique Music Mentoring, and my previous experiences in teaching, youth work, all to do with music.
Amazing. And how did you come about to this work? Just really quickly, in a couple of sentences.
I used to work for Unity Radio. That was my first ever radio show, which I joined quite early on when I started into music. And they had a bus that they used to take out into the local community and run youth workshops. And I fully got involved with that, teaching people DJing, lyric writing, getting them performing. And I did my youth work qualification whilst I was doing that. And one thing led to another.
Amazing. So what do you enjoy most about your job? Just to get to know the workings, the inner workings of Nikki Euphonique. What makes you tick?
I think I enjoy the freedom and the energy that this that working in music brings, and being freelance. I love the energy within the studio, like when you're being creative or you're collaborating, the energy from the crowd when you're performing, and the energy from new artists that I've kind of either worked with through the label or worked with in the studio. So like Subwoofer were releasing a new artist. She's brand new to the industry. She's a vocalist. I've been doing a lot of work with her, mentoring, but also making music. Seeing that shift in energy as they develop as artists is really exciting. Yeah, I can't remember what
Amazing.
I said.
Don't worry. So, thinking about workshops, this podcast is all about spreading good practice, offering training, helping people that are out there on the ground in grassroots communities to do work better, to improve their practice and to grow their skills. So, first of all, thinking about the difference between like a straight arts hip hop workshop and one that creates well-being in the audience and participants, one that's therapeutic. What's the difference? So how do you know a good therapeutic workshop has happened? What are the indicators?
I think it's a shift in vibe or energy of the individuals or the group. So, for example, I ran a workshop, Subwoofer Summer School, a while ago, and we had lots of different people coming in, producers, DJs, and lyricists. And some of the vocalists and lyric writers that came in were quite nervous. Some were bubbling, but some were quite nervous. And the person who was leading the lyric writing side of things, he had an amazing energy, and that energy kind of rubbed off on them. And you suddenly saw them all kind of lifting each other up and getting pretty hype and vibey. It was a very noisy table where they were doing the lyric writing, and it was great to see. And by the end of it, even those ones that were a little bit nervous were kind of inputting into the lyric writing. And they got to a point where they felt ready to perform alongside everybody else at the end of the session. And even though they were still a little bit shy, they did it, and they were being hyped up by the people around them. And alongside that, it's also like giving them a safe space to feel like they can input. So creating that space where they can say, I do like this, I don't like this, I want to write about this, I want to perform. And creating an environment that they can input into, and being aware that everybody's kind of different and might do that in a different way. So if they're inputting by the end of it, you've done something right.
That leads me to my next question about safety. Thank you. What makes your workshop safe for you to deliver and for participants to participate?
First of all, it's awareness of safeguarding. Like, I think having a team, or at least a couple of the team members that are trained in safeguarding is really, really important. And then they can implement kind of a process for referrals if it's needed, an awareness amongst the team that maybe aren't trained in it of what safeguarding looks like and how to safeguard everybody, including the staff at workshops. Having a really clear referral plan in place. So like at workshops, because I'm training safeguarding, I'd normally be that point of referral if something arises that somebody wants to discuss. So if someone discloses something to a staff member and so on. But also on a personal level, just having a safe space where people can be themselves and be creative. So I used to work in prisons and teaching music, and obviously it's a youth offenders institute, so there's obviously rules and regulations and so on, and they've got to behave in a certain way in certain parts of the prison. But the music space, it was very much about them being themselves and being able to express themselves. So some of the lyricists wanted to talk about their crime, and they might have had like a little bit of a bad boy attitude or whatever it is, and I was like, look, you are you. Talk about what you've been through and what you've experienced, but you can't glorify your crime because that's not what we're about. But you can talk about what you've learned from it. So they were still able to talk about what they wanted to, but they were doing it in a positive sense, which made it safe for others that might have been in that music room that didn't want to hear about the kind of, they don't want to hear about a crime glorified, but then they learned from each other in terms of what they've taken out of it as well, which is quite nice.
Thank you. That's so useful. What are the external factors that could help deliver a really good therapeutic hip hop workshop?
Resources is something that you'd like access to. I mean, it's quite hard when you're starting out with funding and so on. So getting funding is it's a good place to start, but it is very competitive, as I'm sure we both know. So yeah, funding's great. I think sourcing funding that's right for the project is great. But if you haven't got a funds, it could be like looking at people that want experience in that area. And if we're talking about resources, staff might be resources. So getting volunteers involved initially that maybe want to get into youth work or are really passionate about music, and they might get involved looking at cheap or free ways to do it, or you're getting that experience off the ground. Because when you do apply for funding, it's nice to have proof that you can do it. So if you've got like a free workshop that you've kicked off, even if it's a really small thing, that's proof that you can bring people to your workshop, that you can run a successful workshop. Maybe you gather feedback there as well. You can source really cool staff. You can run an engaging workshop that works, and then that's more proof for that funding provider to give you that money so you can do the bigger workshop and so on and so forth.
That's a good pro tip. I'd never thought about that. Thank you. What barriers might stop you from offering a good therapeutic hip hop workshop?
There's a few. I mean, personal barriers is one of them. Like if you've been through something, which a lot of people have, and you're talking about something similar, or say a singer is writing about something that's quite close to you in your heart and your past and so on, that's quite hard to manage. And I think you've got to have that professional approach where you can't kind of blurt out everything you've been through, but at the same time, if what they're talking about resonates with you, it can open up a nice dialogue with them. So it's having that professional personal balance where you can talk about what you've been through, but you don't go too personal with it, if that makes sense. It's a point for dialogue, but you don't have to hide it. Like you don't have to sit in a corner and try not to get upset. I think we're all emotional human beings. It's about being real, isn't it? But also keeping in the back of your mind you're professional and you're the one that's providing that therapy and that support. But support can be a two-way thing. I think a lot of the people that came to youth workshops that I've worked on, they resonated with the staff because the staff have been through similar things to them, and that's a good thing. That's why they feel comfortable being their authentic selves and engaging in activities and so on.
It's an equalizer, isn't it? It humanises staff. If you say, hold on, do you know what? I know how you feel because that's something that's happened to me. I did a workshop with offenders, and I found that when I opened up a little bit about my story, people could see that, oh, she's been through this and that, and this activity, the creative kind of, hip hop and the writing and lyricism, it's helped her. So she's come through and now she's passing it on. So it made me feel like I had mentors, wisdom to pass on to other people and gifts to share. 100%. So So, looking back to when you began this work, can you tell us one or two things that would have helped you measure the impact of your work better or maybe more easily? So, we want to share tips with the people who are listening so you can spread good work. So, I'll just repeat, looking back to when you began this work, can you tell us one or two things that would have helped you measure the impact of your work better and more easily?
So with kind of the youth work stuff that I did in the beginning, it was the way that we measured it was like how many people were attending, because we had reasons that we were in that specific community. Because I'll give you an example. The Unity Radio bus would go to a specific part of the city, and it was funded by the council, and there was a purpose. You know, like there's been a lot of young people drinking, or doing drugs in this area. So let's give them something to engage with other than that. So we'd measure it by how many people had turned up, whether there was people still in that area drinking and taking drugs and so on. The conversations we had and the kind of, did we hit certain outcomes? We did another one around like sexual health. I mean, we were still doing music, but we had sexual health discussions going on upstairs. So it's how many people engaged in those sexual health conversations, what they took away from it as well, because we obviously had like resources for them to learn about STIs or even take condoms away and things like that. So that would be a way to measure. So it depends on the outcomes, I guess. You can have outcomes you've got to hit that are set by funding providers like the council. Or
Don't we know it?
Yeah. So how you're hitting those outcomes and different ways you can measure it, but you can also have like within you, what are your kind of key KPIs, your key performance indicators, what's important to you as a provider of workshops, and in the long term, what do you want to achieve with what you're doing? And I think that's a really good motivator. For example, like one of my things is I want to get more women into drum and bass and electronic music. So I tried to run a lot of workshops. Like we did a women only workshop, but it was run by women. Everything was taught by women. Anyone could attend, but it was predominantly women because it was around International Women's Day and non-binary artists. And one of the conversations we had was just how much more comfortable they felt just being themselves and not knowing everything. Do you know what I mean? Because it was a room full of women, and it's quite hard to do that if you're on a music tech course or something and there's a room full of, it's normally a room full of males, because it used to be, at least, it's a very techie subject, isn't it? And it attracts a lot of men to it. And that was, although it wasn't one of the outcomes, was have a good conversation and make sure everyone's feeling really happy and comfortable. Obviously, we wanted to do that. That was a personal outcome, and it was successful, and we had proof of that, and we were able to kind of measure the success with the topics of conversation, the amount of conversation and feedback and so on. So it varies, depends on the workshop.
So did you like take a note of the topics that were covered in the conversation kind of thing?
Mental note at the time, because obviously we were deep in conversation, but afterwards I'd do like a write-up of what went well. And part of this was for me so that I could reflect on it, because reflection's a massive part of this whole process when you're doing workshops or you're in education. So reflecting on what went well, what didn't for you personally. But then all of this can go and make your next workshop bigger and better. And it can also go into any funding applications, or if you want to work with employers like that are looking for someone to provide a workshop and so on, you've got this evidence there of what went well, and this evidence that you're reflecting, professional practice, they love to see that. Do you know what I mean? So there's pros and cons for it in different senses. But I think to avoid breaking the conversation, it was always a mental note and then a write-up as soon as I could after.
Really good tip. Really good tip. Thank you. So what guidance do you wish you had before starting to help improve your evaluation skills? So, for example, what is evaluation in terms of well-being? Thinking about how to manage the dark spaces in healing, like, tricky situations that a participant might recount where it might touch a nerve, which you mentioned earlier. So what guidance do you wish you had that would improve your evaluation skills?
I wish that someone had been able to say like, if this happens and you get told this information, this is exactly how you respond to it. But nobody ever does that. You kind of just got to figure it out for experience.
Can you give some example of what you wish you knew, or a thing that somebody said in a workshop that you've had to work out an answer to or a response to?
Yeah, well, I think I can't. There's a couple of different workshops, but one of them was like they started talking about they wanted to write about things they'd been through in their life, and it was like an abusive relationship that was ongoing. So it was a family member, and I was obviously straight away safeguarding head kicks in, and we've got to look after this young person now because it's a current situation, but we also don't want to detract from the environment and the other people are in here. We don't want to trigger the other people too hard as well, but we also want to create this open environment where people can talk about what they're going through and write about it, because that's what music is. Music is therapy. Do you know what I mean? So it's how, and I was like the main staff, well, the only staff person at that time when this topic came up, and I couldn't leave the group and so on, but I was aware that I needed to deal with this situation. So that was, yeah, thinking on your feet is a big skill. And how you manage that situation without completely changing the energy or saying like, no, we don't want to talk about that, because that's not what a therapeutic workshop's about. So it was about managing that conversation, keeping it flowing without stopping them talking, and then finding the right time during the workshop where I could talk to that young person and sort out the referral to our safeguarding team and all the rest of it to make sure that that was dealt with and that young person was safe. And then there was other young people that were triggered by that conversation, so then managing that and talking to them, and making sure they were okay. So, and that was in the space of a few hours. And then obviously it was like a week-long workshop. The next day we had to check in and follow that up and that kind of thing. So yeah, how you deal with that when you're on your own. And I think it's problem solving skills, it's transferable skills there, isn't it? It's thinking about, you're a human being, it's not always going to be perfect, so it's easy to just panic in those situations and think I'm going to do this wrong. Do you know what I mean? And then you'll do it wrong. Just think, no, I've got this. I'm a human being. I'm caring. This is really happening. This is reality. So kind of let it be, but just think about maybe not asking questions that would make that conversation go too deep initially until you learn more about the room and the people that you're working with and so on. And I wish that people could prepare you for things like that, but they can't. You can't until you've experienced it. But maybe more talks and more discussion from people that have experienced it about how they dealt with it. I think in a space with professionals that provide these kind of workshops, that would be easy to do because we've been through similar experiences. And maybe there needs to be a website with, if this happens, this is a way to deal with it, kind of thing. I'm sure there are lots of resources out there.
Yeah,
but
that's a really good thing. And I've done some recent training with trauma-informed schools, and they have a booklet where they say, if a child does or says this is how you could respond from a trauma-informed lens. And also, this could be the root of that behavior. So when you see people go, oh, I'm not doing that. Oh, it's too hard. I'm not going to write a song. I can't write a song. I can't write. I'm no good. This is part of the fight, flight, freeze. And now there's a new addition to that, fawn response, where your brain gets triggered into a trauma response. And so an animal might bolt from a fire or a loud noise like thunder, or they might lie down dead. And in human beings, the freeze manifests as saying, no, I can't do it. Very depressive kind of attitude and self-loathing, self-criticism. So thank you. That's really interesting. So we're going to look at our final question now. And that is, what would be the job description for somebody coming into this practice? So thinking about, if you're going to write a job for a therapeutic hip hop workshop artist, what would that look like? Maybe give me 5 things. Sorry, let's do 5 things that you would need, 5 qualities.
5 things. Skills. So the musical skills, the writing skills, the knowledge of the genre, and kind of reading into that. in many different ways. I think having some it depends on the workshop, but I'd like industry experience, so performance experience, releasing, that kind of thing, because then from experience, people that are getting involved in workshops and mentoring have more faith in you as an artist and musician, or having those links with those networks that do you know what I mean? And then skills that would help you with the kind of therapeutic side of it. Some experience or training and qualifications around kind of therapy, youth work, safeguarding, and so on would be expected. Personal experience, I think, like at subwoofer workshops, we employed some ex-offenders because it was part of, we wanted to help with the rehabilitation process, and a lot of those people had life experience that other people wouldn't have, so we're able to engage with others. So obviously there's lots of different things you've got to consider with safeguarding and so on if you are going down that employing ex-offenders route, but life experience is a big one. I think that needs to be on there. And then just personable skills, and I think this is what comes across in more kind of the interview when you meet someone, how they interact with other people, how they engage with other people, specifically the people that they're going to be working with that have been through trauma, or that are of a certain age.
So like having lived experience people, or people from the community that you'd be delivering to or with in an interview panel to select.
Yeah, that could work. I mean, we've had like, this is more in education, they've done like a micro lesson with the group that they might be teaching, and then it's about getting feedback from those students. Obviously they're students, so they might be like, oh, it was boring, and it's like, that's not a feedback about the person. Do you know what I mean? We gave them the topic, so the topic is the decision from us, that it was about how they deliver and engage. And yeah, you take some feedback with a pinch of salt, don't you? But it's more the observation side of things, maybe how they interact with certain people. It could just be how they interact with us, like, because some people have dealt with trauma, and it might be like discussing a topic that could be quite sensitive, and how they deal with that topic and that conversation, and that could just be an observation that's made.
So just thinking back to your comment about what participants might say in a interview mock workshop to select a facilitator or an interview panel, maybe there's something about giving them sentence stems or cards where they can hold up sort of pre-written statements like, I found the work engaging, or I found the workshop and activity engaging, the person was approachable, or you could like rate, rank. So there's a thermometer exercise I used as a teacher where you literally put your thumbs up to show that you, in a non-verbal way, so that you're not saying, I don't like that person. You could just say, would you feel comfortable working with this person in a therapeutic hip hop session? And then your participants from your community group could do thumbs up, wiggle their thumbs in a sort of like a, what would you call this angle? Like a 0 degrees angle, and then thumbs down for this wouldn't make me feel comfortable. So there's different ways like that.
100%. Rating's a really good way to do it, like the smiley sad faces and so on, like, like having a comment, and then they could write it on a piece of paper or something like that. It's a good way to get the feedback. But I think you don't really, you'll know once someone's in that setting if they're right for it. I've worked with lots of people that we thought were going to be great when they went for all the interview and everything, and then when they got in that situation, they weren't, for one reason or another. I'm not going to go into details, but I think, you've got to give them time to adjust as well, because if you've never taught in that situation, or been in a youth work situation, or worked with people that have experienced trauma, you've got to learn on the job a little bit as well. You can be as prepared as you want, but until you're in that situation, you don't really know.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's been insightful, and I'm going to really enjoy looking back at our interview. And just to say, we'll be transcribing our interviews as research, because we are doing a research bursary with the Cumin Network, and that stands for Contemporary Urban Music for Inclusion. And a part of that role is that I'll be researching how he can spread the benefits of doing work in a therapeutic well-being capacity around hip-hop. And in the UK, I want to widen that to reggae, jungle, UK garage, bassline, grime, and all the other fruity, jungleistic UK music genres that have spawned from here. So that's all from us today. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to tune in to the rest of Enter the 36 Chambers Glow with the Flow. Bye!